Hello and welcome back. If you don't know who I am, I'm Dan. I'm the current UK champion for Settlers of Catan. And I'm here today with an analysis of a game I recently played in the King of Catan Proven Competitors League, which is an online league with many of the best players from around the world. Now, I'm showing off this particular game because it didn't go very well for me, and I'm on a quest to try and improve my ability and get better at this game so that when it comes to the European and the World Championships, I've got a chance. Because right now, there are loads of players around who are much better than I am. So I'm hoping that by analysing some of the mistakes I made through this game, that will help me improve in the future, and maybe it'll help you improve as well. So who do we have in this game? We have Biaki. He is the current German runner-up and a former German champion. He's been to the World Championships. He's been playing Catan for a long time. And then we have Flying Chinaman and Julio, both who are extremely proficient in the online world, and they've got great experience in tournaments in the US and in Peru. So this is a very strong table, lots of really good players, really good chance to test myself against good players and see how I fare. So let's have a look at the placements on this board. Now, I'm picking first. There is one place which stands out extremely strongly, which is this 8-5-10. It seems like the very natural, obvious pick because it's very high production. It's got the two best resources with ore and wheat, and it's next to a 3-for-1 port. Although there's a pretty good chance that someone else takes this 8-3-4 and beats me to the 3-for-1 port. We can talk about that later. There are other good spots on the board. It's worth just looking at them just in case. There's this very nice high production 6-9-5, the 5-9-10 next to it, and we also have the 8-4-5, the 8-5-10. They're the strong spots. There's other reasonable spots that might get picked later, like this 6-11-2, 6-11-12, I should say. But I think the choice for me is fairly straightforward to go for the 8-5-10. No problems there. Biaki is up next. He chooses the 8-3-4. I think that's a very sensible standard pick. He's ensuring that he's getting on the best ore with the only one spot available left for it. He's also getting some brick, which if he doesn't go with either ore or brick, then he very likely doesn't get any on the way back. Potentially the 11, but that's not very strong. So the more rare resources, he's getting on both of those. And he's also setting up self well to be able to be flexible to play either road or army. So if he ends up, somewhere around this 6-11-12 or 6-3-11 or something on his second settlement, then he's got a really powerful road setup. And if instead he ends up on a spot that involves this 8 or with the 5 or something around this area, then he's also got a chance to play for army. So it's a reasonably sensible, flexible, strong spot. Now, this choice from Flying Chinaman is slightly more unusual, you might say, because there is this glaring out, there's this 5-6-9, which has 2 more pips of production. And so why would you not go for this wood, and why would you go for 2 less with the sheep instead? Well, there's various reasons. One which he mentioned during the game was that, if he takes this and points downwards, someone almost certainly is going to take this 6-11-12 and cut him off with their free starting road. And so the road in that direction is not very likely to be helpful. Further on, we also have the fact that sheep is reasonably rare on this board. So apart from this 8, which now, because of this placement, only one person is going to be able to be on, there's just a 10, an 11, and a 2. Whereas wood is extremely abundant. There's and on the way back, he's going to end up, probably, if he takes this spot, he's almost certainly going to end up on this 6 or on one of the 6s or on the 4. And so there's not much urgency to pile on loads of wood, where the sheep is a little bit rarer and maybe more important to pick up in this spot. So that explains why he goes for the 5-9-10 instead of the 5-6-9. Okay, now we have Julio, who takes the 8-4-5 and the 9-10-2. Now, the 8-4-5 is a very logical, straightforward, expected pick. You're taking the only reasonable 3-hex spot on this 8 sheep, so you're going to be probably getting plenty of trades with other people for sheep. You're also getting a very high production, and you're also building towards this wheat port on a board where there's plenty of wheat. So individually, this spot makes a lot of sense. Now, the 2-9-10 may seem a bit more surprising because it's very low production. It only has 8 pips compared to, let's say, the 6-9-12, which has 10, or this 6-11-5, which has 11. So you're going to get less resources rolled. But the reason why he chooses it just is so effective with his port setup. So at the start, he might have much less production than everyone else. But once he manages to build here and settle, and build here and settle, then he has the wheat port and the sheep port. He has loads of wheat from the 5-9 and the 5. He has plenty of sheep from the 8-8, and maybe the 2 if that rolls. So he's got a really good flexible setup to fight for army and to buy development cards. There's also the fact that this 10-9-2 gets him on ore, which allows him to play a development card army-based game. And I think if he's looking at the other setups of me and Byaki and Flying Chinaman, he notices that his ability to play a road game, he might end up in a 3-way fight. But by going for army, he's probably just going to be facing up against me. And if he is just facing up against me, and he's restricting the availability of sheep and claiming the sheep port for himself, he's severely restricting my ability to fight him for buying dev cards. So I think this is a really strong setup, a great play, and even though it might appear that 2-9-10 doesn't have much production, definitely a really good spot. Flying Chinaman, he comes in with this interesting choice of the 6-3-11, and he points inwards. Now, normally, the general rule for placing settlements is you want to point towards the coast, and the reason is you will typically not get ploughed, and you will have an available settlement spot to expand to. So if, let's say, he points towards the 11-12 or the 11-4, no one is going to be starting their settlements on either of those spots, so it's a guaranteed place to spot. So why does he point upwards? It's because he realizes that this 10-3-11 is pretty much certainly going to be available. So the 6-11-5 works now extremely well for Byaki, so it's almost certain that Byaki will take this 6-11-5 to pair with his 8-3-4. And so he then asks the question, what would I do as the black player? Would I ever go in this spot, the 10-3-11? And, well, the answer is no, because it's so low production. Now, we discussed in Julio's position, low production isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I don't have the port to make up for that. And if I do place here, I'm struggling for expansion spots. I mean, I could try to go up to here, but because I don't make any brick or wood if I settle here, it's very likely that Byaki, who settled here, will be able to win this race, and I will just not have much chance for expanding. So Flying Chinaman has recognized that the 10-3-11 is going to be open, and it makes a good expansion spot for him because it allows him to access ore, which means later in the game, once he's settled, he'll be able to join in with getting cities and getting development cards. It's also a great individual spot, even if we don't think about the direction of the road, because it allows him to have a reasonable chance of connection between his two settlements, although they are a little bit far apart. And it gives him double numbers on brick, so that puts him as favourite for producing the most brick in the game, which is going to be the rarer resource out of brick and wood, which is going to determine who wins the road race. The thing to be careful, though, of course, is that Byaki then takes this spot, and there's the potential for Byaki to cut off the connection between Flying Chinaman's two settlements, and therefore restrict his ability to make the longest road. Because if Byaki is able to come through this gap here, then Flying Chinaman basically is out of the road race, and Byaki takes it. But based on these two-player settlements, it looks like those two are going to be competing for road, and me and Julio are going to be competing for army. Okay, now it's my final placement. And I have options. It's not straightforward. There are, well, in-game, I saw two standout picks. So option 1 is the 9-4-11 and pointing upward. And option 2 is the 6-9-12 pointing left. So let's first talk about the 9-4-11. So the 9-4-11, why would I take this? The first reason is it gets me on some sheep. Now, it's pretty clear that I have got the most ore and I have a reasonable amount of wheat. If I take this 9 for 11, it allows me to get some amount of sheep to go along with that ore and wheat, so that hopefully I'll be able to buy development cards. Now, an obvious drawback is 11 is not a particularly common number, so I'm kind of heavily relying on 11s to roll to be able to get those development cards. And Julio's not going to be wanting to trade sheep with me because he is my competition for army, and is quite happy if I can't afford to get development cards. Another positive is it gives me this, this expansion spot over here, this quite high producing 6-9, so that when I expand, I can accumulate lots more resources. But again, that also comes with a downside in that if my hand gets full of wheat and full of wood, that's kind of useless if I don't have brick or sheep to pair it with. And if I don't have a port where I can port that wheat or that wood in excess, then it's just going to clog up my hand, and it's going to be kind of useless. Now, I do have an option for a port for this 3 for 1, but I'm kind of in a race there with Biaki. And Biaki makes plenty of brick, he makes plenty of wood. So it's going to be likely that I lose that race. And even more so, the table is probably going to want, like the other players are going to want Biaki to win that race rather than me, because otherwise I look too strong with the port and the 8. So the downsides of this spot is that even though it allows me to get a reasonable amount of production and it hits me on some sheep, which is useful, I kind of get stuck in this portless position where I'm making lots of useless resources and I'm very heavily reliant on the 11. What about the 6-9-12? The 6-9-12 allows me a bit more chance to expand and spread and settle. It gives me a better chance of winning this race for the 3 for 1 port, and it also harms red because I'm essentially blocking where their road has gone. So it has these merits, but the reason that I don't like it is because I have to think about what is my win condition. How am I going to win this game? And the answer to that question is I'm going to be fighting for army. If I take this spot here, how do I fight for army? I don't make any sheep, and I don't make lots of any one particular resource like wood or brick which I can port at the 3 for 1 port. I don't have that flexibility that Julio has with the wheat port and the sheep port. And I can't fight for road because I have no way of I'm basically trapped in over here and I'm kind of trapped in over here. So that's why I decided not to go for the 6-9-12. Now what I tried to do in the game, I tried to tell Biaki, look, I'm going to go on the 6-9-12. Why don't we come to some sort of deal where I don't take the 6-9-12 and you leave the 8 or 3 for 1 port open for me? So I tried to do some kind of negotiation. I even offered extra cards, maybe an ore or something like this, for him to leave that 8 for me so that I wouldn't block him in the other spot. But he correctly predicted, he just said no, because he didn't think I should go for the 6-9-12 anyway. He thought that was not my better choice, and he was right. So that deal didn't work because I couldn't follow through on the threat that I would actually go there. And so I did end up going here on the 9-4-11. And I pointed upwards. Now, one spot I didn't discuss there, which I've thought a lot more about post-game, is this 8-3 and pointing this way. Now, the downside of that is it gives me less production. And it means that my numbers that I'm hoping for, it means I'm extremely reliant on an 8, and when I get to here I also reliant on a 10. So I'm basically just praying for 8s and 10s and 5s all game and nothing else. So it's a very high variance strategy if I do this. But the benefit is it means I have more sheep than just these 2 pips from the 11. It means I'm directly harming Julio, who's my army opponent. And it just means that my ability to get dev cards is increased. So we'll see whether this is a good option later on. I want to come back to the placement choices once I've gone through the rest of the game. And there's possibly a bit of outcome bias in my leaning towards that spot based on how the dice rolled, based on how the game went. But, well, I'll leave that open to you. There was my discussion of the different places. I think that every decision that everyone made here makes sense. It seems like a reasonably even setup. Got 2 players kind of going for road, 2 players kind of going for army. Each setup kind of has its strengths and its weaknesses. It seems like a well-balanced game. I suppose one thing in Julio's favour is because he's producing less at the start, he might not be the victim of the knights or robbers so much. And once he has got those expansions, and if he hasn't been stolen from so much, then he's got so much flexibility for porting and just continually getting development cards and keeping the robber off him. It allows him to pace really well. Whereas my setup is pretty bad for pacing because I have such a strong looking 8, 5, 10 spot. That 8 is such a prime target for the robber. And that means that early in the game, I might be at risk of getting hammered. And by the time other players overtake me, I won't have the ability to claw my way back in. Like, my strategy relies on being able to get cities up early and just outproduce everyone, and hopefully roll some 11s to get devs. So in terms of pacing, in terms of the actual layout of the board and resources and win conditions, everyone seems pretty even. But in terms of pacing and where the rob is going to go, I think that's where I'm at a disadvantage and Julio's at an advantage. Okay, let's go into the game now and have a look at some key decisions where important things happened and where I made some mistakes. So my first interesting spot is just my second turn of the game. So this is just the 5th roll of the game. I already have in my hand Knight, and I have 2 wheat, and I have 2 ore. And I'm very aware that Byaki has 2 ore in his hand, so I'm looking at Red's hand here. And so I'm aware that I could use my knight here, and with a 50-50 chance, I could take that ore and I could have a city extremely early in the game, which would be very powerful. And so I spent a lot of time debating whether I should do this or not. And then I think, well, why not tell Byaki that this is what I plan to do? Ask him if he will do a trade for me, so that not only will I not use the robber on him, but I will use it on someone else so that I don't have that knight in reserve for later. So I won't have a city and a knight, I'll just have the city. I said, I'll use the knight on someone else if you trade me that ore, but he said no. Again, he's holding the fort pretty strong. He didn't fall for my discussions at the start of the game. And again, here, he thought that it was not a threat that was worth me following through on. And after a lot of reflection, I just thought, it's not worth it. Because if I do manage to get the city, then that's great, but I'm a very prime target for the robber. That 8 is just going to get hammered all the time, and I won't have a knight anymore. And suppose I don't draw the ore, well, then I'm just in exactly the same situation as I am now, but down a knight, which is just a big backward step. And I reason that, if, I have plenty of wheat and ore production, and so if I don't get a city on this turn, it shouldn't be too long before I'm able to get one. So I decided not to go ahead with this idea that I was very tempted with. And I think that was a reasonable decision. Let's move on a little bit further. Okay, now I'm in a spot a couple of turns later. I've rolled a bit of wood, but I have the robber now on me, and I've had one of my ores stolen. So I'm actually further away from a city than I was before. Now, obviously, what I should do here is I should use my knight, move it off the 5 which I'm on, makes a lot of sense, and put it on the 5 over here, which makes a lot of sense. I'm not targeting any one particular person early in the game, not making any enemies, meaning that when a 5 rolls, I get wheat and no one else does. It's a sensible block. But the real decision here, and this is where I make my first big mistake of the game, is in who I steal from. So notice that each other player doesn't have that many cards, and if I am paying any sort of attention to the rolls that have been got, then I should know that Julio has a wheat, that Byaki has a wood, and that Flying Chinaman has wheat. And so I should be asking myself the question, do either of those make a big difference to my hand? And the answer is yes, because if I take the wood, my hand has an action. And if I take a wheat, then I'm stuck with 7 cards, no ability to trade anything with anyone, and no ability to port anything. So it's pretty crucial here that I should take the wood, use that to 4 for 1, probably, take a sheep, buy a development card, noting very, very importantly that Julio here has 3 development cards already at this point. And, I'm still going to be getting robbed, so I want to be able to take it off me. So this is my first major mistake of the game. I don't think about the resources that people have. I see Julio as my biggest threat, especially because he has 3 development cards. I steal his wheat, which makes my hand completely stuck. Now, fortunately, I roll another wheat, which means at least I can reduce some of the cards in my hand. But if I'd stolen from Biaki, then I would have had a guaranteed development card. Instead, I decide to port the wheat for... Well, I try a bunch of ways to make trades. It doesn't work, so I have to forfeit more of my wheat. I decide to take a brick. The main reason is I don't make any brick. If I'm spending 4 resources to get a card, I feel like it might as well be a card that I don't produce. And it also gives me an action, whereas porting for a sheep, for example, or an ore, they don't give me an action. They force me to pass with 5 cards. Not ideal. Now, the next question is, where do I put my road? If I play it at all, maybe I hold on to it. Because I have the option of fighting for the 3-for-1 port with the 8, or just playing safe, going towards the 6-9, or gambling that I'll somehow be able to get by the next turn, get a road and a settlement in my hand. In the end, I decide just to go for the straightforward 6-9 road, and I think that I'm okay with this decision. I think that roading for the port, down here would have been a mistake, because there's a very high chance I lose that race and then I've wasted a road. I can see a reason to try and hold on to my road and maybe try and get some trades, maybe try and somehow get my hand to be a road and a settlement, so that if Biaki doesn't settle there soon, then I might be able to do this all in one go. But there's a risk of going over 7 cards, being forced to make other trades and stuff. In the end, I decide just to play it safe. I don't think my chances of winning that race are very high. I think that's reasonable. Let's move on to another spot. Now I've gone forward a little bit. So now we're in a situation, there's been a little bit of expansion. I've managed to get myself a city and another knight. Julio's played a couple of knights, and Flying Chinaman and Biaki have managed to expand their settlements a little bit. Now it comes to my turn. My 8 is blocked. I'm obviously going to play my knight. And I end up doing a very similar mistake to before. I'm just not paying enough attention when it comes to moving the robber and thinking about what resources I'm going to get. So when I first move it, I do very little thinking. I just put it on the 5 and I steal from Julio. I'm like, he's my biggest threat. I should just take from him. I don't give it enough thought. And then I happen to roll a 7. And this time I decide maybe I should think about this a little bit more. And I do this crazy thing here of going to solo block Biaki, which just doesn't make any sense. Now, why did I do this? It's because I completely mistracked Biaki's hand, and I had a deal with Flying Chinaman. So I said after doing my initial knight, which is already a mistake, but once I rolled a 7, I realised, well, maybe it would be nice to try and actually get a resource that I want here. I wonder if anyone could give me a brick for a non-block. So I would give them something, they would give me a brick, and I would block someone else. And Flying Chinaman agrees to this deal. So that's why I don't block anywhere that Flying Chinaman has. But then I completely misread the chat. I'm like, wait, what's Biaki's 1 card? And I scroll up and I'm like, Biaki got a brick. Oh, and then Biaki got a brick, but then he built a road. Okay, he has a brick. So I reason I can get 2 bricks out of this. I completely missed the fact that his latest card was a wheat that he got there. And so I end up, it doesn't affect what I get that much, because if I steal from Julio instead, I'd probably get a wheat anyway. But it means the robber is harming Biaki, who's not that big a threat at the moment, when really I should be hitting this 8 that Julio's on, because he is my big threat. He's got 2 down devs, he's got 2 knights, he's fighting me for army. So this was just a major mistake, and it comes down again to when I'm playing the robber, not tracking and not thinking carefully about what resources other people have. So yeah, mistake number however many I'm on. Let's go to the next interesting spot. Here's one slightly interesting point. This is not a mistake, it's just a notable moment of the game. I've managed to roll a few good rolls in a row. I have a very strong and helpful hand. And it's Flying Chinaman's turn. So at this point in the game, we make a deal where I give him this trade. I give him an ore and a wheat for a sheep. And he will then look after some cards for me so that I'm not at risk at 7ing out. So this is called insurance. This is a standard method. And I think even though I'm offering 2 cards, which are quite strong, the ore and the wheat, actually getting the sheep out of it and getting the insurance is just really strong because it gives me the settlement and it ensures I don't lose my cards. So I think this was a smart play. Even though I'm helping someone else quite a lot, they're helping me out more, in my opinion. Okay, now here's another interesting spot. And here, again, there's definitely a mistake. Now, it's possible that things won't transpire as I hope and that they just go the same way despite the mistake. But it's something that I really missed. So right now, it's Julio's turn. I have 6 wheat in hand. And Julio has the wheat port. So let's think about what I'm going to do on my turn. I'm going to almost be pretty certainly resigned on my turn. Unless I get a really nice roll, I get a 10. I'm going to be doing 4 for 1 with these wheat. I'll probably be doing 4 for 1 to take an ore to build a development card. Or maybe I could take a brick and build towards the 3 for 1 port. But it's not ideal to have to do a 4 for 1. There's an opportunity for me here to try and make a deal with Julio to do some kind of port service. Now, it's risky, given that Julio's my competitor, and he's got 2 knights down, and he has 4 down devs. It's very risky doing, trades which benefit him. But there's definitely something I can do here which benefits me more. So let's suppose I offer to give him a free wheat. I say, I'll give you a free wheat if you give me 2 lots of port service. So essentially we do some combination of trades which ends up with, I end up with, let's say, a brick and an ore. And I give away 5 wheat. That's something that would be potentially manageable to work out. And basically that's a free card for me and a free card for him. But the free card for him is a wheat, which, there's a plenty of and he makes loads of anyway. Whereas the free card for me is either a brick or an ore, something much more valuable. So if I'm able to make this trade, then it could be massive for me. Now, it's possible that he just says no, he doesn't want to do it, which is fair enough. But it's still a mistake to not notice this as a possibility or not consider it or make the offer during the game. So that's one thing definitely to think about, is seeing, can you make trades where you get other people to port your resources for you, to be able to you to be much more efficient with your cards. And so if we do go to the next turn, a 6 gets rolled, I'm kind of stuck. I have to do the 4 for 1 to take the ore and then buy a div card. So at the end of my turn here, well, I'm very lucky. I managed to get a monopoly, but I could also have a brick in my hand at this point and then build a road, which would be quite significant. So there's another mistake. Let's move on to another interesting spot. Okay, so now we reach the point which is probably the biggest mistake of my game. Hard to say. My hand is completely just full of wheat and wood, which is completely useless when I don't have a port, and it's really annoying. Now, one option I have is to use my monopoly, but all I would be getting, like all the resources that everyone else's have, is basically just more wheat or wood. And I would be porting that 4 for 1. It would be an extremely inefficient way to maybe get myself 1 point. Maybe I could city, or maybe I could buy, a couple of development cards. It's just not enough for Monopoly, which is the best development card in the deck. And I'd rather save that Monopoly for a better occasion later on. So in that case, I'm like, well, I have to just, again, 4 for 1, any sort of trade, everyone has is wood and wheat. Any sort of trade I can't really get off. It means I have to do another 4 for 1. Now this just is like, it really shows the negative of my setup. Trying to play an all-wheat sheet game with very little sheet and no ports means you just end up being really inefficient. And so even though you might be the highest producing player and getting loads of resources, and if you're using those resources for 4 for 1s, it's just not beneficial. Anyway, what shall I do in this spot? So, if I'm doing a 4 for 1, well, I essentially have 2 options. What I could do is I could just get rid of all my wood, get rid of 4 of my wheat, get rid of 8 cards, take a sheep, take an ore, and get a development card. And that is definitely the right thing to do. There's just so much urgency for me to fight Julio for army and to keep getting development cards and keep the robber on him. And even if I don't get knights and I don't win the army race, there's just so much benefit to being able to move the knights or getting another monopoly or getting victory points, It's just urgent that I buy development cards. But I just feel I just don't like the idea of it. And the reason I don't like the idea of it is, theoretically, I should, be able to make ore, and I should be able to make sheep. And so I should be able to make development cards, whereas I don't make any brick. And if I port my 4 wheat for a brick, I can build a road towards the 3-for-1 port. And that puts me closer to a settlement, but it also helps me with my monopoly. Because in my head, I'm thinking it would be nice to monopoly ore if a couple of 10s roll, or sheep if, an 11 and a couple of 8s roll. But there's a pretty high chance I'll end up monopolying for wheat or wood, because they're just the resources that there have been so much of throughout the game. And my reasoning is, my thought process is, if I settle on that 3-for-1 port sooner, it means when I use my monopoly, if I have to use it for wheat, I'll be able to be more efficient with those resources. I'll be able to exchange my resources 3-for-1 instead of 4-for-1, which could be the difference between, a victory point or 2, or an extra development card, or something like that. And so, that's why I decided to go for the brick. And my explanation, is kind of reasonable. I think there's, a kind of sensible logic. But what I miss is just how urgent it is that I need to have development cards at this point. And yes, I might be able to theoretically make ore and sheep, but I'm not making ore and sheep. I need to have the ability to get knights. I need to be able to keep the pressure on Julio rather than just moving along with a single road at this important stage of the game. Okay, let's carry on. So this is 1 turn later, and unsurprisingly, again, my hand is completely stuck, full of wheat and wood. The robber is on my 8. It's not looking great. This time, I do decide to pull the trigger on the monopoly. I do a cheeky, dirty monopoly on Flying Chinaman, where I do a trade for wheat, which just was not very necessary, didn't help me very much, and was just a mean way of hurting another person who's struggling in this game. So that was not a sensible move. But by pulling the monopoly, I managed to get loads of wheat. I managed to get myself a settlement and a development card. So normally the rule is, with a monopoly, you want to try and be able to get, a couple of points out of it. Maybe a couple of cities, a city and a settlement. A settlement and a development card's not great, but because my hand was so stuck otherwise, and because there was so much wheat out there, it felt like an okay decision at that point in the game. But realistically, it's just a bit too late. Like, I'm too far behind. I'm not going to win army at this point. Julio has the advantage. He has more development cards than me. And Chinaman also has now played a couple of knights. So the amount of knights in the deck, the amount of devs that there are left is small. It just feels a little bit too late for me. And actually, if we follow through the next couple of turns, I only get 1 more turn before Julio takes the game. Okay, what can we learn from this? Let's reflect on how this game went. So, any game of this high level, when it ends with 2 players on 6 points, that's not ideal, because realistically what you want is for someone to be the leader, the other players should be able to collaborate between each other to be able to be more efficient, to help each other buy development cards, to target that person who's leading. Now, Julio was clearly the threat throughout the game. And so it just shows that we didn't do a good job of preventing him. Now, partly that's through some of the mistakes I've outlined earlier in the game. One of the things I noticed during the game was, let's have a look here at the resource gained by rolling dice. I received more resources than anyone else in the game throughout this game. And yet, I was so far away from winning compared to Julio. And that is just because of this fact that he was able to be so much more efficient. He was able to use his wheat port, use his sheep port, be able to use his resources much more efficiently. Whereas I was constantly doing 4-for-1s, which is just so bad with my wood and my wheat. And so the first lesson to take away is, like, if you are having a setup with all wheat sheep, then it's so risky to go with very little of one of those resources and go without a port. And so that's one reason why, on reflection, this 8-3 may have been a better starting pick than this 9-4-11. Because it gives me that flexibility to maybe be able to do some porting. And it at least gives me a reasonable amount of sheep so that I'm not heavily reliant on the 11s. Having said that, I mean, obviously I've outlined some mistakes. There's definitely lots of things I could do better. If we do look at the dice stats, only one 11 rolled for the entire game, and for that roll, the sheep in the middle was blocked, which means I didn't receive a single sheep card from that 11 for the entire game. Now, if we played this game, 10 times with exactly the same starting positions, and this dice graph came in different ways, there'd be some games where the 11 rolls 3 or 4 times. There'd be some games where it massively overrolls, maybe 5 or 6 times. And in all those situations, I would probably do much better than I did, which means that there's a big chunk of this bad result that does come down to dice luck. And I want to be careful not to put too much emphasis on this being down to me playing really badly. There is some luck involved in Catan, but there's definitely lots of stuff I could do better. So the things I want to take away from this game are, firstly, that placement idea of being careful with the all-wheat sheep, especially when I'm going low on resource, or especially when I'm going without a port. And the other thing is just to track other players' resources. I get into a habit, especially playing online, of just sitting there, clicking the buttons and seeing what I've got in my hand. What that means is when I roll a 7, I suddenly am against the clock with the timer running down, trying to work out what everyone has. If I am just paying attention to what numbers are rolling and paying attention to what people have in their hand, and actually continuously thinking about what would I do if I rolled a 7, who would I steal from, what would be useful here. Just being a bit more proactive in my thinking before I actually roll the dice, that will lead me to making much better decisions with my robber choice. So they're my main takeaways from this game. I hope you found that interesting and insightful and educational. It's very helpful for me to look back through my games like this. It's helpful for me to study and to improve my game. I'm also open to anyone's feedback in the comments about any other things you notice that I could have done differently. But I'm putting this out there to help me. But I recognize that there's plenty of content on YouTube with Catan, but so much of it is live gameplay. And I think there's space for more of this kind of analysis, post-game analysis, placement analysis. Maybe it gets fewer views, but this is what I want to see, and this is the stuff that I'm going to make. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again at some point soon.